Friends, we can't do Jewish Standard Time 10 minutes later because there are hundreds of people already online waiting for this, unable to be here in person for various reasons. So we're going to start in 1 minute, but if we could, as people arrive, come sit up close, that would be preferable. I'm not the start of the program. Rabbi Levy is. Justin, how much time?
40 seconds.
Okay, here he is, Rabbi Ross Levy. You can clap for him, it's okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. Oh, can you hear me? Okay. So just a few moments ago in the sanctuary, I mentioned that our Torah reading for the afternoon of Yom Kippur comes from chapter 19 of the book of Leviticus. And as Rabbi Greenstein pointed out to me last year, I hadn't thought about this before, this chapter is both the physical and the metaphorical heart of the Torah. It is smack dab in the middle of the Torah and really rests at the heart of our tradition, of our Jewish tradition. And as our heart, it is a call to ethical responsibility and actively working towards a better and more just and a more equitable world. It calls upon us to be a holy people, just as our God is holy. And that holiness is not simply what we do in here within these hallowed walls, but this holiness is made by what we do out in the world beyond these walls. In the words of Rabbi James A. Wax, religion confined to sanctuary walls, religion on a part-time basis can do little, but religion whose voice is heard everywhere and whose influence is constantly felt will steer mankind from confusion to certainty, from strife to security. It's my honor this afternoon to introduce this first program of the Rabbi James A. Wax Institute for Social Justice. This institute is based on the foundation of journeying from knowledge to understanding to action. And it will organize special speakers and panel discussions that will deepen our understanding and awareness of issues that continue to plague our community. With this knowledge in hand, the Institute will provide resources for all of us to find pathways of personal involvement so that we can continue to be a beacon of hope in our Memphis community and beyond. In doing so, we will continue Rabbi Wax's legacy of bringing the light of Judaism and the values of equality and justice to which we hold dear and spreading it out into the world. We look forward to your support and your input as well in growing this institute into a beacon of light for our Memphis community and far, far beyond it. I will now pass it over to my rabbi, my teacher, and our moderator for today, Rabbi Micah Greenstein.
Thank you, my teacher, my rabbi, Rabbi Ross. My first day as a Memphis rabbi was July 1st, 1991, which was the day that the National Civil Rights Museum was dedicated. And leaving that dedication and coming to Memphis, mainly for Temple Israel, Rabbi Danziger, and this great community, but I was fascinated with the question of Southern rabbis and Black civil rights. And it led to publishing a chapter in this book. And at the book dedication, an elderly African-American gentleman, probably in his 80s, came up and said, "You rabbi at Temple Israel?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Would you do me a favor?" I said, "Sure." He said, "Will you send my regards to Rabbi Wax?" Rabbi Wax had been dead for 5 years. I didn't want to disappoint him. I said, "I'll do my best." The early rabbis teach that there are people who live as though they have died, and then there are people who've passed away who still live. And Rabbi Wax is one of them. I'll read from this chapter hopefully at the end of our panel dialogue. And I'm going to, for all of you, I know thousands of people will be watching this, so you can look up Pastor Keith Norman, Senior Servant Leader of First Baptist Church Broad, and you can read his bio. You could also look up Dr. Roz Nichols, and you will read about Freedom's Chapel, about her path-breaking work in Memphis and nationally. And then you can read about Dr. Russ Wiggington, the president of the National Civil Rights Museum. Everyone can Google that later. I want to make this introduction personal because these are not just three luminaries. These are family to me, confidants. So here's what I want to say in their presence, since I'm not sure there'll be another occasion when the four of us will be on the same program like this. About Keith Norman. NAACP, National Board. When I was on the NAACP board and Keith led this region, all of you been to Central Barbecue? You know the one by the National Civil Rights Museum? Around the corner, a block around the corner, there was a marker that said, Memphis Race Riot, 1866. Now, Civil War's over. It's Reconstruction. Do you know what happened there? 46 black people were killed, women raped, scores wounded. And it was the testimony of the survivors in Washington that helped lead to the passage of the 14th Amendment that enabled African-American citizens not to be 3/5, but that's right, to be as equal as any child of God. Keith and I called our mayor at the time, and Keith saw to it, if you go there now, we asked the state history panel member, I'm sorry, you can't change monuments, you can't change all those that were erected during the, quote, lost cause of the Confederacy. Go there and you'll see it says what it really was. The Memphis Massacre of May 1st, 1866. 150 years later, I know not many of you were there. And by the way, those of you watching, when you come to Memphis, don't stop at the National Civil Rights Museum and Central Barbecue. Walk around and see this national marker. We marched from the museum with the mayor 150 years later. So for all the bad, we have a long way to go, but as Dr. Hook said, you have no idea how far we've come. Now, about Pastor Roz Nichols, I'll say this. There's a phrase the rabbis teach, Mikol Melamdai. Much I have learned from my teachers, more from my peers, but I've learned the most from my students, especially at Memphis Theological Seminary, where she was my star student. I taught for 25 years following Rabbi Wax and her mentor, Reverend Starks, who many of you may remember. And about Russ Wiggington, again, you can look up the bio. This is personal. He's not only the former provost of Rhodes College, the president of the National Civil Rights Museum, which just Thursday night is paying tribute to Rabbi Wax at the Orpheum at the Freedom Awards. So get your tickets, those of you here and watching. What people don't know is, and you're about to hear, Russ knew Rabbi Wax as his teacher at Rhodes College, I believe. So without further ado, pick your seats. Let's hear it for Pastor Norman, Pastor Nichols, Dr. Wiggington. I'm going to sit here so that the camera's on the three of you, and I'm going to pose the questions and get out of the way. Each of you should have a microphone. We can start this way. Who was and is Rabbi James A. Wax to you as a Memphian and religious leader? What does Rabbi Wax mean to you personally and religiously?
Personally, Rabbi Wax is among those who have made my life the way I live it possible. His unwavering pursuit of justice and equity, his courage to speak truth to power, has shaped and defined how I walk through life. His commitment to diversity in his relationships and pursuits all shape and define my life. That's personally, and therefore professionally, because I seek to strive to do the same thing by the ways in which I live my life.
As you alluded to, he taught me when I was a first-year student at Rhodes. With all the brilliance in the room, I'm sure you weren't like me, but I was bumbling and stumbling, trying to find my way. And here's this person who allowed me to bumble and stumble and embrace that. I'm not from Memphis. I didn't know who he was. I literally was doing a research paper in another class about the sanitation worker strike. And I kept running across this Rabbi Wax name. And because I was bumbling and stumbling, have I mentioned that yet? I went up to him after class and said, "Might that be you?" And because he was so gracious, because he was so caring, because he was so unassuming and not full of himself and about the people, he said, "Well, yes, I did the best I could." That taught me the power of humility. That taught me the power of action. Taught me that substance will always rule the day. And I'm grateful for not just that in that particular encounter that stands out, but the way in which he literally carried himself in 1984, helping a student and all of us find our way, but also how he carried himself many years before that and what he stood for. So Rabbi Wax is important in my life, and I can't wait to celebrate him Thursday night.
So thank you for the opportunity of being here, and also to members of the Wax family that published information to leave him on record for those of us who did not meet him personally, but I knew of him as a child here in the city of Memphis. But if you sit next to Susan Adler Thorpe week after week, you better know Rabbi Wax, because she asks you every broadcast, have you read the information, and have you know Rabbi Wax? And so I feel as if I'm a Wax scholar now to some degree, because I felt like it was going to be a test when I got here today. So thank you, Susan. But on top of all of it, Rabbi Wax is one of the most unique individuals that I've ever had the opportunity to study, because one of the things I saw was the early childhood being the only Jewish family in Mississippi. I mean, in a community, that stood out to me. And then the dedication of a person who, according to the story as I read it, inspired or encouraged by a Methodist minister to become a rabbi, and not being able to get into school, and then going to study Hebrew for 6 days a week so he could.
Keith, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but Susan just gave you an A, but not an A+. It's all true. It's Missouri, not Mississippi, but everything else is true.
No, Missouri is school. Missouri is school. He was in the community as a child in Mississippi.
I stand corrected.
I know my wax young people.
Brother, I love you. I just don't want you to get in trouble.
No, I'm listen.
It's happened to me.
Susan sent me the Cliff Notes every week. I mean, this was weekly.
Same page, brother. Go.
So literally, when I look at the dedication, and here's the thing I want to evoke. I don't know if we get around to this question, but as I look at people who help light a fire under my children early on, where is that today, and how do we find these young, dedicated hearts and minds? Because he was so young when he saw his call to serve, and when he saw that sense of what he was supposed to do, to think about changing the world at age 15. That was huge to me. And then for someone to recognize that in him, help him to get his start, that makes me wonder, what are we supposed to be doing today to help find those young startups and get them on the right path?
Let's not go to my next question, because you've got us going. Whenever we teach the history of the movement, it was a youth movement.
Yeah.
John Lewis was 23. Everyone in room 306 was under 40. King was the oldest at 39. What about that? Either of you.
You go.
You're
the younger.
As somebody who spent almost 25 years on a college campus, I both.
Were you in college 25 years?
I'll say this: they taught me something different every day, but I did manage to graduate in somewhere near 4. But one of the powers of being in space with young people is they're courageous. They have that beautiful mixture of naivete and courage. And it's the reason the heart of the movement had people so young. There were people older who were doing important work, but the youth movement was so critical because they didn't think about asking permission. They might ask for forgiveness, but permission was not required. You have to have that kind of vigor and passion, and you have to lead with it. And quite honestly, you have to do it before you convince yourself there are too many other things to put on the line. That's really important. And we have to stay conscious of that, because as we get older and we get practical and we get different levels of responsibility, it becomes harder. The power of youth, we have to accept some of that naivete and some of those decisions that might be questionable for the good that they bring. We are not going to turn significant civil and human rights corners without young people. I'm here to tell you.
Please go.
So
I'm not leaving, I promise.
So youth and courage. I met Roz Nichols over 25 years ago, and she was leading a courageous movement regarding domestic violence because she had lost a dear friend.
Thank you.
And it's Domestic Violence Awareness Month now, and she didn't know any fear. And she's this young girl out here talking about stuff, and I can call you a young girl. She didn't know to be afraid, and she didn't know not to be courageous. And so that's what I saw in Wax, and that's what I see in really all of my colleagues. I mean, because Russ he's older than us, but he was in college 25 years. I mean, so, but we didn't know to be afraid. And we didn't see it. And one of the things that really impressed me about Rabbi Wax again, there was a point during the confrontation with Loeb, correct me if I'm wrong, that Frank McRae, one of the ministers, said to him, "Slow down." And he said, "I'm scared." And Wax turned to him and said, "So am I." It's not until we are in it that we start thinking about the repercussions and the consequences. And he never put that ahead of the cause. And I think that's what it takes to get the job done. And it comes when you're young and you get going.
Someone said years ago that warriors have to be young. that warriors have to be young because of all that what has been said, is that you see the goal and not the obstacles in between. And that as we have a little bit more season in life, we see the obstacles in between. I'll use a personal reference to kind of undergird this comment. In 1968, so I was born in 63. So when I say Rabbi Wax shaped my life, that's not hyperbole, right? And the March 28th, 1968, the one that turned violent, my mother, who, if this is 68, I'm 4, when she got the itch. Mother was 25 years older than me, so she was in her 30s, right? And she left the house headed to the march, my grandparents' house on Edith Avenue in South Memphis, headed to the march. And my grandfather, her father, was standing on the porch. This is a story that was giving me screaming to say to her she could not go. You cannot go. It is not safe. You don't need to go. My mother was bent. She went. My father was hearing my grandfather, her husband, and was saying, wait, Mary, and my mother was gone, right? And along with her went my Aunt Barbara and my Uncle Kenneth. They all took off, not in cars, just gone, 'cause they were headed. My grandfather was petrified because of what he believed could possibly happen to them. I am fully grown when I calculated my mother's age, my father's age, and the fact that my mother had a baby at home and my uncle and my Aunt Barbara had 3 babies at home. Now, they weren't teenagers, but they still wanted the pursuit of a better life for those babies that they left at the house was greater for them than the fear. Warriors have to be young. And they can remain, what I hold about Rabbi Wax is that they can remain young at heart.
Yeah.
That you can get age, but that warrior heart will overshadow even whatever is in front of it. The other piece I want to say is that, yes, we must keep youth in it. Warriors, seasoned warriors, must find new warriors. Mm-hmm. The proud place that I hold in my space today, Megan, is that a part of the Micah, not the rabbi, a part of the Micah Youth Council are the warriors that are going to move our community forward. They are young, they are diverse, they will get me told in a heartbeat. One day I said in passing, I said, I am just so proud of you young people. And they said, don't be condescending, Roz. And I was like, oh, excuse me. And so I also think that not only do we help raise them up, but more importantly, we have to identify where they are, because they're already out there. And then we stand and walk alongside of them and encourage them and chastise from time to time when they go running down the street like my mother. I'll end this story by saying when the bullets were fired through, she saw a bullet go through a woman's afro next to her. And the humor of this is that my bold mother, who took off running, headed to the race, to the march, took off running back home and left everybody behind. They were like, Mary, Mary, Mary. So she learned a valuable lesson. But I think it's both and. Warrior spirits exist no matter what your age. And warrior spirits also help to identify warriors that are young in our midst.
Pastor Nichols and Pastor Norman, you both have made me better preachers. I've been at your churches numerous times, and you made me a better orator, Russ. But the best sermon I ever read and heard on tape was this sermon. King is assassinated on April 4th. It's a Thursday. Friday night's April 5th. I'm going to combine 2 questions. Just take that with you, and if anyone else wants it, it's available in the Temple Israel archives. Anyone streaming, just write us and we'll send you this sermon. He just let it out the day after King was assassinated. So I'm going to combine 2 questions for you all, because I'm loving this and I don't want it to end. If I were a Christian minister with a PhD in theology, Christian theology from Boston University, in my 20s like Dr. King, I would have chosen Jesus as the motif of the civil rights movement, the suffering of the people. But King used the story of the Israelites from slavery to freedom as the motif. He was actually hoping to be at Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel's house for the first night of Passover. If you're doing the math, the 4th, when he was assassinated, is a Thursday. Shabbat, this sermon is on a Friday. King was going to Heschel's house for Passover, his closest Jewish friend, before his life ended. And at our Passover table, some of you have been at my table, we always say, once we were slaves, now we're free. Now, even though 20% of Jews in America live below the poverty line, just go to Florida, Jews are predominantly white. And by the way, I just want to make this point. There are many Jews of color today, even in this Ettelson-Wax Hall right now. We have Latino Jews, Asian Jews who happen to be Asian, African American, but most of the Jews who came to this country between 1880 and 1920, they didn't go to Israel like when we went together and saw 103 different ethnicities in Africa and all the Arab countries. Most are European. And while there's significantly more Jews of color today in the U.S. than when the NAACP was founded by the African American Jewish Coalition in 1909, the highest award, in case you didn't know, given by the NAACP is the Spingarn Award. It's named for a short, white, balding Jewish guy. It's the highest award that the Black Jewish Coalition in the 50s and 60s is no longer as organized as it once was. Why do you think that's so? Understanding in my house here, I always have to explain. People think all Jews are alike. 2 Jews, 4 opinions. People say, how come the African? I'm like, which African American community are you talking about? Which denomination among 6? So understanding that times have changed, how can Jews and blacks increase our proximity empathy?
By
Please.
doing this. We're doing it right here, right now. And by not allowing people to interpret what we should be doing to us when we know full well what we should be doing. The first time I was invited here to share with Temple, I was very honored. And soon after I heard, and I came here, I spoke at Immaculate Conception once, and you and I and Roz did the Ramadan fast together one night, and somebody asked me the question, why are you going to all these places, and should you be going out there? And I wouldn't go if I were you. And I said, well, you have to be invited in order to go. So I wasn't going to allow them to interpret to me what I should be doing with communities outside of what they defined my work should be. And I think that's been one of the things that we have all been able to do with one another. You and I have worked together. I mean, the first call I received after the Leicester Street massacre was from you. You picked up the phone and you said, what do I need to do to come and help you? And let me pray with you and pray for you. And that was out. I mean, that didn't impact you in the proximity that it impacted me, but you realized that it impacted the city that we lived in and the people that we all love. And it's a calling for us to heal the city together. And so I think we have to quit allowing people to define and draw circles and boxes around who we should love and how we should love and when we should love and how we should serve and all of these things. We know that the world needs healing. I picked up the phone and called you October 7th. I said, hey, I need to call my friend and I need to check on my friend to see how he's doing and say, what do you need me to do? And we have to stop allowing people to interpret this work that we do.
Yeah. So when you work at the National Civil Rights Museum, if you stand on the courtyard for about 15 minutes, you're going to feel a range of emotions. And that's any 15 minutes of any day, even on Tuesdays when we're closed. Because people will be there. They will be there from all over the world, and they will be paying their respects. They will be in reflection. There will be a range of emotions. All of those things will happen. But we are in a renovation mode right now because people leave room 306 and they say, what happened after Dr. King died? And this renovation that we're in is about 1968 to the present, and the focus is so that we can capture that for society, and in particular young people. They have to see it, feel it, touch it. It has to hit them more than intellectually. It has to hit them in their hearts. And so we feel like, Rabbi, that the young people are going to lead us. They are going to circle back and make those connections. They may make them for different reasons, fundamentally from those connections from the 50s and 60s, but they are going to see, they're going to see and witness that healing that Reverend Norman just referenced, and they're going to do that collectively and in community. They have to be grounded in the history. We have to provide them a lens by which to do that. They do have to understand that there's a slavery experience in this country that we've yet to fully talk about. They have to know that. But then they have to see those intersecting stories and commonalities and come to the present, because we're losing our leaders from that era. We've lost many of them. We're losing more every day. And we need those young people to pick up the mantle.
So my first thought is I'm very grateful that no one in my community and sphere of influence told me not to be in relationship with people who were different from me. Mm-hmm. No one. Right. I went to prep school, and the name that still resonates with how I was able to go to prep school was Jed Dreyfus. Yeah. And nobody said anything about his ethnicity or his faith. He was just a good man who helped me get to prep school. The circle of people who I knew who were doing justice work in the congregation I grew up in, Maxine and Vasco, were friends with people who may not have looked like us, but they were friends, and nobody ever told me that I was not supposed to like them. The man who says I was his star student at Memphis Theological Seminary, I've told this at Temple many times, so some of you just be prepared. It's nothing bad. I took modern Judaism because I just thought, I need to take modern Judaism. I want to learn about modern Judaism. And this person came skipping into the class with suspenders on and got started. And I remember looking at him thinking, oh my God, who is this? Micah Greenstaff, Rabbi Micah. I may convert. I had the biggest crush. I was a good student because I had a crush. He was just talking.
I know Cheryl. I'm leaving.
No. So here's the funny part. This is a wonderful part about Cheryl. I mean, now we've been friends now forever. The first pulpit that Freedom's Chapel ever had came from Temple Israel. I mean, we've been friends forever. But the first time I said that, it was at a Seder service where I was associate pastor at Metropolitan, and I came over here with our youth, and I shared that, and there was dead silence. And I remember saying, don't worry about the person who says it out loud.
Right.
Micah is my friend, and he has helped me to understand my own faith better. And when we have had moments of contention, which have been very few, some more recently, I have reached out to my friend and said, he can attest to this, I am doing such and such. Is that going to conflict or jeopardize our friendship? I'm going to do it, but your friendship matters. That's my friend. Yeah. And that's this community. And that is the shared story that we have of walking through the darkest places of our stories and yet having common places where we can stand in light together. So I sit here grateful simply because the people who raised me never told me not to like somebody because they were different from me.
Yeah, thank you.
Micah, Rabbi, may I add one thing to that?
Please.
What Roz just gave a testimony to, and what each of us have said, I think, in various ways, is defend the character of the person you know when they're not in the room. And so often there are opportunities when people try to divide us and break us apart. You can't talk about the value of women or isolate women ministers when Roz is not in the room and expect me to be silent. It's easy to do when she's here. You can't talk about the Jewish community or the conflict in Israel and expect me to be silent when I love you publicly. And I think what happens to us, and the reason there's been this divide or this chasm that has fallen between the work of the NAACP and the community from the 50s until now, has been we have not spoken up for one another when we are absent from the room. But we can't allow that to separate us any further.
Amen. Yeah. I could cry, honestly, for the number of times you've had my back, all of you, each of you. And in 4 words, I think what we're really saying is that the relational is transformational. It's not programs or proclamations or prayers. It's not even who you go to lunch with. It's like, who do you travel with? Who do you have dinner with? And by the way, before this gets too heavy and we're going to have time for questions, y'all look like a couple in the middle there, Roz and Russ. And the two of us, Keith, we're known as twins, only he's tall, dark, and handsome. I'm short, white, and aging. It's happened in many forms. But I want to open it up to questions from you. I have more, but don't want to go to my sheet. I also want to recognize I just saw him because this mentor, I wouldn't say he's subtle to a fault, but that's what makes him the most amazing leader. It didn't end in room 306. It didn't end on April 4th when the young assistant, he's still young, not quite as young, to Rabbi Wax, Rabbi Harry Danziger, who is in this hall with Maifa. And when you look at the iconic pictures of what came out, if only, so I just wanted to recognize the presence of Rabbi Danziger. Okay, before I go to my sheet, questions out here, please. Really? Okay, there she is. It's going to be a test for Pastor Norman from Susan Adler Thorpe. All of you streaming, you've heard her name. Here's the quiz. If you'll take the microphone.
I was taught to stand when she was in the room.
Don't let Pastor Norman fool you. He's as smart and as brilliant as any of my friends. I have just one quick question. We live in a difficult era as Jews, and in this community also. And when you came in, you noticed all of the security that we have to have these days. Let me just ask each one of you, if you can answer briefly, what is it that you say about the Jewish community when we're not in the room?
Thank you. Go ahead, anyway.
Yeah, repeat the question. Someone asked, repeat the question.
Rabbi, if you repeat the question, Rabbi.
Oh, that's putting me on the spot there.
The question was,
If I understood it correctly, it was what do you think is being said about the Jewish community when we're not in the room?
No, the specific question was, what do we say?
What do
when
you
y'all
say?
are not in the room? My simple answer is that I have friends and that I'm connected to this, and that regardless of what I hear on the news, I relate to this by the friendships that I have and the conversations that I have with people. And I don't get into a debate about agreeing or disagreeing, because I do believe the authority to live, that's not the word, the right to live and exist as a people is not unique to Judaism. Every human being has the right to exist and live. And I come from people who have had to fight for that, and so I respect people who fight for that. That's it. And I don't know if that helps, but I don't get any deeper.
I pretty quickly put my historian hat on and say, if you understand the history of people, there's not a correlation that's stronger in history and the struggle and the trials and the occasional tribulation that are shared between blacks and Jews. And when that is at its best, it's a formidable combination, and we've seen that in our lifetime, many of us. So maybe there's been some intentionality about weakening those relationships.
Yeah.
I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but the data shows.
So in various aspects of my work, not just in the faith community, but in healthcare, Jonathan, my friend, in education, there have been people here who helped my children to get into prep school and other places. So I really don't feel the need to defend my responses to people. I will say that's not how I know them to be, and that's not a conversation you want to have with me. And so I'll be real clear. I'm too old to be short, to be indirect with people. I'm going to say what I need to say, and I'm going to cut it off. If you say something about Susan, other than the fact that she's short and bossy, I'm going to say, that's not the way I know her, right? And if you say something about Micah, I'm going to say that's not the way I know him, and I'm going to cut it off, because anything further than that in the teachings of my Rabbi Jesus, he says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. And when you start talking way over and entertaining certain things, you allow people to have a tacit approval to the lies that they tell and to some of the untruths that they try to get in the atmosphere. And so I find that the best way to do it, Susan, is just to tell them to shut up and to cut it off. I'm 6'5", and I'm not scared of people, I will fight. I mean, I'm from South Memphis, right around the corner from where Roz grew up.
This is our day of confession. It's our holiest day of the year. It's 1/11, so for those of us fasting, we're almost at the bottom right now. So this is when stuff comes out of me. The truth. It's so easy to misperceive the other when you don't know the other. I'm just echoing what I'm hearing you three say, that but when you meet someone of a different religion, race, ethnicity, who is as decent, as honorable, maybe more so than yourself, you're never the same again. We may be a progressive synagogue, but we don't allow certain words in here. Like people who don't know African American people, when there was segregation, there's a Yiddish word that, some people would slip into. We don't allow that word in here, because if you know someone who happens to be black, Jewish, whatever. So I think one of the answers to Susie's question is what you just said, that you're talking about my friends. But if you don't have those friends, you can just continue, whether it's a conspiracy or a misperception. Other question? Oh, I think you know that person. You outed her before. If we'll give Megan.
In that spirit, I'm a teacher, so former teacher, I can use my teacher voice.
But it's streaming, so just repeat the question.
One thing, just like all of you said, in my relationship
with each of you and with some of you, your children, and having worked with two of you. So my experience as a Memphian, as a Jew, as all the things, has been so enriched by my relationships, not only with these three, but by having real relationship with the Black community, and especially in this time where there is so much that needs to be at the relational level. And I learned that in my time at Micah with Roz. But one thing that there's a group of us, this is just Susan is on the group with me too, a small group that is bringing the Rekindle Fellowship to Memphis, which is a national program to rekindle the light between the Jewish community and the Black community. And so be on the lookout if you're interested. And this is to get to the relational. So it's rekindlefellowship.org. It started in Cleveland. And to be able for people in the Jewish community to have real relationships around that, I would love to invite all of us to be on the lookout. We're going to start our first cohort in January. So that is...
Say it again for everyone listening. Rekindle?
Rekindlefellowship.org.
Thank you. Roz is, because she was has to leave early, she agreed. If you've never heard Roz sing... with Rabbi Danziger in the room, the first, when I was honored, like, I think it was 8 years or 10 years, you did something and you said I could invite friends. And I invited, you're not a minister yet, you're a professor and a PhD. And Roz just got up there. First of all, lots of speakers. I didn't speak, Rabbi Danziger gave a beautiful talk. I don't know all people remember is Roz singing. That's all they remember. So you can't leave until you sing. So whatever's on your mind on this holiest day of the year for us.
Yeah. Yes. Just gonna hit you upside the head. First of all, I think that when I was representing Dr. Lofton at Metropolitan on the board of MIFA, that Rabbi Danziger was on the board at he was the chair of the board at the time that I was there. So we have history. I really don't have a clue what I'm about to do. I love what comes up. Okay, let's see if this one will work. Out in the highways and byways of life, many are weary and sad. Carry the sunshine where darkness is ripe, making the sorrowing glad. Give as was given to you in your need. Love as your master loves you. Others will trust you if only you prove true every moment you live. Make me a blessing. Make me a blessing out of my life. May God's light shine. Make me a blessing. Oh yes, this is my prayer. Make me a blessing to someone today.
Oh, what? There you go. There you go. You may be seated. She has to go. I want these two to have the closing word, and I just want to explain this day that never ends. At 1:30, our congregation is such a beautiful blend of relative newcomers and Memphians. You're going to get to hear two of the exceptional ones at 1:30. We'll have a stretch break after our closing words at 1:30. Please. Any thoughts?
Susan provoked a thought that I'm glad Roz had a chance to sing, and you all forgive me because I share a traumatic relationship with guns. I had 2 brothers to be killed violently. I was president of the NAACP during some tumultuous years when I was called down from a Boy Scout dinner in the Peabody one night after the young man was killed in Missouri and the verdict came out. And the news cameras came and got me and said, "We need you to do a response because we feel like there will be violence in the city." And so here I was at the Boy Scout dinner where Steve Reynolds, I think, was being honored that night, and had to go downstairs and do an interview. And it was a fearful time. I pulled up on the parking lot of my congregation one Sunday morning. I'm there at 5:30, 6 o'clock. And there's a man in a truck with Confederate flags on it and a high-powered rifle. So I was traumatized. We spend too much on security in worship spaces. The director of police gave me the file when he left office of the number of threats that they investigated regarding clergy and especially of my own life. And so I'm sickened by the fact that you and people all across this world, especially in our city, have to go to their places of worship with security in the manner in which we had to enter today. It happens at my church on Sunday mornings. It's one of the single largest line items in my budget that we have armed security at church. And when I saw that today, I pulled up on the parking lot and saw I drove by Shabbat on the way. I saw police officers out there. I saw them at the opening. And then when I got under the circle at the water fountain, such a beautiful place, only to be escorted in by men who had high-powered rifles. My heart breaks for you. The night we were at the Ramadan dinner was also the night of the Pulse shooting, or the day after the Pulse shooting in Orlando. When we walked in, there were armed security and guards that had to be called in, double the presence of years prior. When worship and peacefulness is confronted in the manner in which it is taking place today, it's disturbing. It concerns me. As I enter into the years of considering succession in my years, I know I don't look like it. I'm so young looking, but I said that to break the moment. I'm saddened. I visited too many of my own colleagues where their churches have been burned. I could no longer speak at the National Black Burned Churches Association. I did it a couple years, and then I had to stop.
There's actually an association.
There's actually an association. When I think about what you experience day in and day out, hated because of who you are, where you were born, or how you identify, where you worship. Such should not be. And so when I pulled up today and I saw that, I smiled, but I cried on the inside.
Thank you. Russ.
Thank you, Reverend Norman. Earlier this past week, I was on a trip, a U.S. Civil Rights Trail trip, with other members of the city and the state and from 7 other states, all in the Southeast. And we went to Montgomery and Selma, and being in community with people from other museums and tourism industry and other places that have a civil rights and human rights core, if you will, as their work. About 100 of us got to be together. And you can imagine sitting on the bus that Rosa Parks literally sit on, crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and then having the opportunity to hear from the 94-year-old still practicing attorney who was Rosa Parks' attorney, Dr. King's attorney, the attorney for the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, to literally hear from him. And his message to us was him telling us the story of his last conversation with John Lewis, 2 days before John Lewis died. John Lewis specifically asked for a call with him, and he said to him, "What I want you to do is just keep on going, baby. Keep on going, because the struggle ain't done." That's my message to you all.
And that's the message of Yom Kippur. We want to thank these doctors, Wiggington and Norman, even if they can't help you with medicine. There are more physicians in the room, but you're the kind of doctor who's a scholar. We are going to take a stretch break, and then don't miss Diane Sachs and Eleanor Talley-Stamberg right here at 1:30. But please show your love for Roz Nichols, Russ Wiggington, Keith Norman.
Sorry.